Hey guys, Scott here with a very long video in which I go over every single sorcery in the game and put them on what I think is an appropriate tier list for some reference and experience. I've been playing a pure sorcerer for well over 100 hours now, and just purely PvP as well. This is a PvP centric list, by the way. It's not PvE related at all because you can really make anything work in PvE. But for PvP, I think I have definitely figured out what works and what doesn't work. I'm not going to claim to know everything because I'm always learning, but I think after 100, 150 hours, I have figured out what are the best spells. And so I thought I would go ahead and rate every single sorcery in the entire game. And let's start it off immediately because this is going to be a long one. First up, Adula's Moonblade. This is an S tier spell. Adula's Moonblade is one of the few spells in the entire game that can straight up one-shot you. And now the thing is, you have to hold your casting tool in your left hand for the spell to work properly, because in your right hand, or when it's chain cast, it's bugged. But in your left hand, when you cast it on the first cast, it hits with the projectile, and it also hits with the sword itself, and it can inflict frostbite. So you have the scenario where you could have three things proccing, and it can easily do 1700 damage that it comes out surprisingly fast, too. Like, it's not a very slow spell. Now, it's not like, unreactable or anything like that, but if you just get some good outspacing on someone like that, and you're just right outside of range, and you're trading with them, yeah, it can do 1700 damage, which is absolutely insane. It's fairly hard to hit on someone that's paying attention, but for the sheer amount of raw damage that it does, and even the projectile, if they are out of range, it still might clip them as well. Yeah, it is one of the best sorcerers in the game, hands down. Ambush Shard is next. Ambush Shard, I feel like, is only useful for one thing, and that is for trading with shield poke turtles, and it is very satisfying for that. For that reason, I'm going to put it in B tier because I find, hitting fingerprint, shield pokers with bleed weapons with this spell to be very satisfying. You just sit right outside of range, cast Ambush Shard, they're stuck on their poke, and they get hit in the back for 400 or 500 damage. Doesn't do very much damage, but it's very satisfying, and it forces them to sort of rethink what they're doing, because in a 1v1 scenario, you can just keep outspacing them and poking them like that. It's very, very effective. Now, obviously, really, really good players are going to find ways around this, and you'll have to get creative, but it does basically change up the status quo for shields that are insanely tough to get through, and for that reason alone, I think it's a pretty solid B tier. Next is Ancient Death Rancor. This spell is... honestly, it's probably the best death spell in the game, and I'm going to put it in B as well. And the reason is, it doesn't really do that much damage. It's not really meant to be like a nuke, but you can actually spam the hell out of the spell. It's a very fast cast time for what it does, and it puts a bunch of delayed projectiles in the air that forces the opponent to react to it in some way. So you basically force them out of neutral, and anything that forces your opponent to do something, I think, is still very useful as a utility. Again, this is not going to be a main damaging spell, but you combo this with other things. You start shooting at a bunch of skulls, and then you shoot some Glenstone Arcs as they're trying to sidestrape it. You have to be creative with it, but it's very good as a utility spell, because when it does hit, it does stun for quite a long time. The problem is it's like an Int Faith spell, and that whole subsective build is not very strong at all. So I'm not a whole fan of Int Faith, but this is probably the best death spell that's actually in the game. Next is Briars of Punishment. This is the actual good one. I'm going to put this one in... I'm going to say C. I've only briefly used the Thorn spells, but there's two of them, so it's not like there's much to learn. This is definitely the better of the two, though. It basically shoots out like a trail of blood, and it kind of wraps around. It can track a little bit, but it's still very easily dodged. It has a very strange stat requirement. It's like a faith-based spell that requires an intelligence staff. It's a very weird subset of spells. Now, there's the Staff of the Guilty, which can make these usable a bit more, but that staff doesn't even scale very well, even with maximum faith. So it's a very niche thing, but that's the most useful one. This Whirl one is horrible. It's just really bad. This is the one, if you ever went into that first area in Round Table where the guy invades you, he uses this spell where he just damages himself and like a little circle appears around him. You have plenty of time to react. It doesn't do that much damage. It's just not very good. So really, really terrible spell. Cannon of Hema. As much as I love the spell for killing people on rooftops, in practicality, it is more meme than useful. However, I will say in invasions, it has way more use than in duels. In duels, I really wouldn't recommend using it like ever. It just costs way too much FP. The charge is way too long. It's just really hard to get an effective free aim cannon in a duel. However, in invasions, there's a lot of very creative stuff you can do with it, because you can arc it over things, you can mortar shot stuff. So I would say for invasions, it's redeemed quite a bit. It's just extremely expensive and very slow, but it is probably my favorite spell in the entire game. Just because I love it, though, doesn't mean it's amazing, but I love Cannon of Hema. It's just not the best because it costs a lot, and it's very, very slow, but very, very cool effect. Next is Carrion Greatsword, I believe. Carrying Greatsword is just a straight downgrade from a Duelist Moonblade, so I'm just going to put it in C tier. There's nothing else to say. It's just a Duelist Moonblade without the projectile or frostbite effect, so it's just worse. That's pretty much it. Next is Carrion Phalanx. This is actually pretty good. I'm going to say this is probably a solid B tier as well. And the reason is it allows you to do things while also preventing people from approaching you. It's very good for buying yourself some space. You cast it, you start walking backwards a bit, facing away from your opponent. It gives you time to drink. If they start getting in your face, you can turn around and quickly and shoot them. So it gives you some time to breathe, and any spell that has a delayed effect like that is very useful. That also brings up Carrion Piercer, which I think is very, very strong. Carrion Piercer is the one that's just a giant forward stab, and you can hold the spell to go even further with it, or you can just tap it really quick to do a very quick stab. It does a very high amount of damage, 900 damage on a non-charged. It does a very, very large amount of poise damage, which it'll basically stun almost everybody as long as they're not jumping or like in full Bull Goat's armor. And if you do the fully charged one, it'll knock down everyone regardless of whatever they're wearing. So it's very useful for roll catching after you've hit with some quicker spells because it goes just about the distance of one roll. So it's really, really good at roll catching, and it's one of my favorite spells. Carrion Piercer is very, very strong. Next, Carrion Retaliation. It's just, I don't think this is good. It's very situationally useful. The Ash of War is 10 times better to the point where I think it's just straight up broken. It does like thousands of damage. This one does like 300-400 damage on a return. So it's just not that good. The problem with this is when you have Carrion Retaliation on a shield, you can just very quickly press L2 or, left bumper or whatever and just parry the spell. But if it's on your spell list, cycling through 10 spells really quick in reaction to parrying another spell, it's just not too feasible. You need to have it like ready to go at all times. Now, in theory, you can have that as your first spell so you can cycle back to it immediately, but that assumes you know you're going against a spellcaster, and it's much better to have other spells in that slot, in my opinion. So the actual spell version of Carrion Retaliation, not that great. Carrion Slicer, I believe, is the best sorcery in the entire game. It does an insane amount of damage, like Ultra Greatsword damage, at the speed of basically a dagger, and it costs very little FP. It has a running attack, a jumping attack, a rolling attack. It is the only weapon a mage actually needs. The one downside to Carrion Slicer is that it does very little poise damage, so on very heavily armored foes, they won't be stunned by it. However, sometimes this is actually a benefit, because if they're stuck in a long animation and they don't get stunned, it means you can just you can kill someone in a second and a half if they're stuck in a long animation, and you can deal with whatever they're about to do. So sometimes the fact that it doesn't stun can be a benefit, but it will get you killed sometimes if you're getting greedy, swinging into someone with a bunch of poise and they out-trade you. So that's the one downside. Other than that, though, it is the bread and butter of basically every mage. This should be your first spell. It should be the thing that you cycle back to every single time. It just has unlimited amounts of uses. It's a dagger with straight sword length, ultra great sword damage, and it's just extremely good. Probably the best sorcery in the entire game. Every build should use this. Next is Collapsing Stars. Collapsing Stars, I think, is a solid B because of the very strange way its projectiles move. If you're casting a bunch of spells and you toss that in there, it shoots out for a minute, allows you to switch to a different spell, and then combo that spell into the rapidly approaching stars. So the fact that it has a very strange projectile time makes it pretty useful. The damage is not that great, but it's a very weird mix-up that causes people to have to change their roll timings a lot. And anything like that, despite not doing much damage, is just very useful. Comet Azure for PvP is horrible. You'll pretty much never hit a player with it. Even if you do, they can simply roll out of the first tick of damage. It does multiple ticks of damage, and it doesn't stun, so they just get hit and roll out immediately. It's horrible. Costs 3 slots. Infinite FP. Just terrible. Pretty much never use that. Comet is extremely good, and it's because it's comboable. It's comboable with Carrion Slicer, with Glenstone shards, things like that. The fact that it's comboable makes it so you can get a very rapid Comet out for 1,000 damage that pierces foes. It's probably only good because it's comboable. If it wasn't comboable, I would not say it's a good spell. But because you can cast it after other things, it comes out really fast, and it's just 1,000 damage, just like that. And it's range. It's got pretty solid range. You can even charge it if you want to mix up timings. Comet is a very, very good spell to be used only really with combos, but still very, very good. Crystal Barrage is pretty bad. It does pretty decent damage, but it locks you in place, and it has a decent cast time. It's just not very useful. I wouldn't recommend using it. Same thing with Crystal Burst. Honestly, all the crystal spells, they sort of suffer from the same thing. There's one very good crystal spell, but it is not these two. Crystal Release is okay for area denial. I'm not a huge fan of these area denial spells. I think there's a lot better stuff you can do for area control. By the time you've shot this up and cast it, it goes to the sky, and then it begins raining down. People have already surrounded you, where really you can just turn around and carry and slash them twice. The fact that you can instantly kill people should be the area denial. Doing this setup, it just costs a lot of FP, and I'm not a huge fan of these, but it does have its uses in like choke points and things like that, so I'm not going to count them out completely. Crystal Torrent is just Comet Azure, but with crystals, so it's just going to be terrible. Eternal Darkness. Again, spellcasters and only spellcasters, this spell is very useful. If you're going against a mage that's spamming stars or rune or comets or anything like that, sucks up all the spells. You have free reign to set up a Terra Magica on the ground, and you can launch your own stars or rune at people while having no danger of spells coming in your face. Why did I choose that line of words? Then also, it deals with a Carrion Retaliation exploit, which hopefully if you're watching this a year from now has been fixed, please God. So there's a lot of very, very useful things that Eternal Darkness does. They're just a little situational and useless if you're not going against the mage. So I think it's a good spell to have in your back pocket. Next, Explosive Ghost Flame, easy F tier. It's like a 14-minute long animation. The recovery is 14 minutes long. This spell, not only does it not do that much damage, but if it hits people, the recovery is so long, they can get hit, fly backwards, recover, roll into you, and backstab you. That's how long the recovery is in that spell. It's horrible. Never use it. Fia's Mist, horrible. You'll never Deathblight somebody ever in a million years. Just don't even bother. Founding Ray of Stars, it's just a slightly better version of Magic Release, or I'm sorry, Crystal Release. So again, for area denial, it's kind of okay. I still am not a huge fan of these spells, and they're very expensive. This one costs 2 FP slots, I believe, or attunement slots, so not very good. Freezing Mist, it's kind of okay as like an area denial as well. It does last a pretty long time, and it does build up Frostbite pretty fast. So in terms of area denial, I'm gonna kind of put it in that same level, but very niche uses. Frozen Weapon just seems pretty bad. It takes a lot of hits. You're much better just simply using a cold infused weapon with an Ash of War that does something like that. Using this on a regular weapon, it seems to add like 50 or 60 cold, which is just simply not that much. You'll probably kill them before you ever do Frostbite, so it's just not very good. Gavel of Hema. As much as I love this ability, it's hilarious. I'm going to put it at the top of C tier. It just doesn't really come out fast enough, and the combo was even slower. It's got a nice AoE, but it's pretty easy to dodge unless they fuck up pretty badly. So it is a very funny spell to bonk people, but even then, it does less damage than like a Carrion Piercer, so it just doesn't seem worth it. It costs a lot. It's slow. The combo is even slower. The AoE is nice, but in my opinion, I found it very easy to dodge. I think I've been hit by it like once or twice in my entire time playing, so not the easiest to hit people with. I'm just going to say right now, all the Magma spells are really bad. I think this is Gelmir's Fury. This is probably the best one because it's got some area coverage and it's still terrible. Very long cast time. The Magma does like no damage. Every Magma spell in this game is terrible. I'm just going to say that right now. And that whole archetype needs to be buffed. It's just very, very weak. Glintblade Phalanx is just a weaker version of Carrion Phalanx, so we'll just put it below. Does the same thing. Glenstone Arc. Very underrated A tier. Glenstone Arc is extremely good, and it's even better against good players because good players will typically not entertain you roll catching them with spells because they will simply side strafe your spells. However, when they try to side strafe your spells, you can actually free aim Glenstone Arc where they're running, and they can't side strafe that because it's such a wide thing that travels kind of slowly. They can't really do that. So you can force people into rolls by doing Glenstone Arcs where they're running, or you can force them to change directions. Basically, it allows you to control the battlefield. And again, anything that does that is very, very useful. So Glenstone Arc, very underrated, one of the best spells in the game. It does still like 400 or 500 damage. It's not even a low damage spell, but the fact that you can spam them really, really fast, it's very low cost. It costs like 18, 16 FP, something like that. And it makes it so people cannot strafe your spells anymore. Very, very, very useful. I'm a huge fan of it. Glenstone Comet Shard, pretty good damage. It's just a worse Comet, so I'll just put it right here. Nothing really more to go here. For the Glenstone Ice Crag, it's sort of the same thing, but it applies Frostbite. So it could potentially be slightly better. It's not bad at all. Glimstone Pebble. In PvE, super useful. In PvP, there are just so many better options than Glenstone Pebble that I'm not going to say it's bad. It still hits for like 600 damage on a well-optimized build. But if you're going to be using that cast animation, it's better to be doing like a Comet or a Swift Glenstone or something like that. So it's okay. It's not too bad. Glenstone Stars is just baby's first Stars of Ruin. It's just not really worth using because there are just so many better alternatives. So not so great there. Gravity Well is just a worse version of Collapsing Stars, so I'm just going to put that at a solid D because this version is just basically the same spell but multiple projectiles. There's a lot of spells in this game that are just direct downgrades to others, so they just have to be lower because obviously, they're not going to do much. Then we have, I think I missed this spell. Oh, I missed the Bubble, Greater Ocular Bubble. That's the one that goes really slowly, and then explodes for a pretty big amount. It's situationally useful. It requires Arcane, which is very weird to scale, but it travels too slow to really catch people. It's a very big explosion, but they can see it coming a mile away. It's good for PvE, not so much for PvP. Great Blade Phalanx. I'm going to say this is pretty much the same as the Carrion Phalanx. They pretty much end up doing the same damage. These actually stun a bit more because they're, obviously bigger blades, but they end up doing pretty much the same amount of damage. So I would say they serve the same purpose, and they're honestly equally as good as each other. They're pretty solid spells. Great Glenstone Shard. Again, it's basically just like Pebble, but more damage. So we'll just put it above that. There we go. Great Ocular Bubble. Wait, no, I did have that. These are out of order. We'll go back to where... I'll say that to see. Okay, sir. Then we have Loretta's Great Bow. Loretta's Great Bow, I think, in invasions is situationally useful. It's completely useless in duels, but in invasions, I think it's situationally useful. The problem is it's very easy to dodge. It has an extremely long wind up. The saving grace of the spell is it has very, very long range and pretty good tracking. But other than that, it's very, very slow in invasions. If you're getting ganked, it's likely you're not even going to have time to sit there and begin casting the spell. You need something pretty fast. So I think the speed is the biggest detriment. The damage is pretty nice, but overall, very situationally useful. I'm going to say Loretta's Mastery is actually worse than the Great Bow. It costs way, way more FP, and I think FP costs are very important when talking about this stuff. It's very, very expensive. It costs like 60 FP or something, and it also is even worse in certain terrains because it splits out. So if you've got walls or trees or anything to the side, they end up just blowing up on walls and they don't even really end up hitting. Now, technically, if you get all four to converge and hit someone who's not moving, yes, it'll probably one-shot them, but that almost never happens. So I think Loretta's Mastery is actually a downgrade to Loretta's Great Bow. Lucidity, I mean, it's pretty rare you're going to have to really ever use this. I'm just going to say D tier. Actually, I'm going to say F tier because there's just simply boluses that do the exact same thing. So there's an item that does this for free. So that's a pretty worthless spell. Magic Downpour is just a worse version of the Founding Stars of Rain. Or Rune, whatever it's called. So not a huge fan. Magic Glint Blade is extremely good. Like I said, any spell that has a delay where you can start setting up other things is inherently very, very strong. So you can set up a Glint Blade or two, and like it opens up so many possibilities. You set up 2 Glint Blades, and then you just drink some Estus. If they try to punish you and hit you, they fire off and hit them. You can also change the delay by charging the spell, so you can do one charged one short one, so they'll kind of hit rapid fire one after another. It basically gives you a lot of room to breathe, and it's a very good thing to combo into other spells. So for that reason, Magic Glint Blade is actually extremely strong because it sort of gives you some breather room, which mages very often will need. Magma Shot, oh my god, it's terrible. It does no damage. The Magma does even less. It's just awful. Meteorites of Astal and the regular Meteorite, they're funny. But in PvP, the chance of you getting someone not moving in front of you while you begin the cast and wait for the portal and wait for the meteors to drop, it's just very unlikely you'll ever actually hit people with this. Very good PvE spells. You can damn near one-shot bosses with these spells. Pretty useless for PvP, so I can't really recommend you use those at all. Night Mist is pretty bad. You just walk out of it, and it also damages your allies and damages yourself. I guess for area denial, it's not useless, but it's a pretty bad spell. Night Shard, I think, is actually a bit better than the regular Glint Blade spells. I'm not sure if they come out faster or not. They can also be buffed by the Staff of Loss. But it's a good, just little quick poke spell. It's not amazing. It's not terrible. It's just sort of kind of the same thing. I think that was actually... Is that Night Shard or Night Comet? Dude, these icons are literally identical. Look at this shit. I'm just going to put Night Comet above here because I can't even tell the difference. I think this is Night Comet. These are... like the Office meme. That's the same picture. There's like slightly more white there. Night Comet is just the upgraded version of Night Shard. Night Shard is a little bit faster as well. Oracle Bubbles. Really, all the bubble spells are not that good. I will say, if someone is not moving, the Oracle Bubbles actually does an insane amount of damage, but I mean, anything can do a lot of damage if they're not moving. And the arcane requirements for these spells is very strange. It requires a very unique build that not too many spells benefit from, so not a huge fan. Rancor Call is just a worse version of Ancient Death Rancor, so I'll just put it in C. It still serves a purpose, but, I mean, you'd want to use the Ancient Death one. It does the exact same thing, but just less skulls. Ronnie's Dark Moon and Renala's Moon, they're not useless, but they're pretty bad. Probably the only saving grace for these spells is Renala's can at least apply Frostbite even when it misses, and they have an insanely long range with very good tracking. But unless someone is just simply not looking at you or something like that, they have an hour to react to what you're doing. You can still be hit while you're starting the Moon. They're just not very good spells. Everyone says, I gotta get to 78 to cast these. You pretty much never want to use these in PvP. They're just not very good. Next is Rock Blaster. These Stone Digger spells are not that great, and they're very expensive as well. This does like a kind of a shockwave as well. It's situationally useful, but again, there are much better, faster, more damaging AoE spells than this. So honestly, I'd put this in D. I can't really see a reason I'd ever use this. Rock Sling is, I'm gonna say for PvP, it's a fairly high C tier. It's not great because hitting all 3 projectiles on one player is extremely hard. They have to basically be standing still at a medium range. They can't be too far, not too close. Side strafing dodges a lot of it. The one saving grace is they track for a pretty long time. So even if they are far away, it still pressures people for a couple of seconds, which might give you some room to combo something else. So it's surprisingly good. It's more for people that are ganking you than for you getting ganked. It's a very good tool for gankers because a lot of tracking rocks from people that can't be interrupted is a nightmare. But other than that, not super useful. Rolling Magma, again, terrible. All the Magma spells are terrible. This one leaves like a puddle on the ground that's kind of useful for area denial, but you're better off with any other area denial spell. Any of the Founding Ring of Stars or Crystal Release or Magic Downpour, any of those things are just going to be better. It's just not good. I will say Ricard's Rancor is actually kind of useful for an area denial spell as well. It's very telegraphed, so you know it's coming, but it's really meant to just say, get out of my face. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in C. Again, it has kind of sort of a weird stat requirements as well. Really, all of these red spells have very strange stat requirements for a sorcery build, but it's situationally useful. It's good for getting people out of your face and stuff like that, which, can be good. That's pretty much it. Scholar's Armament is just really bad. There's no reason to ever use Scholar's Armament, basically ever. If you want to have a magic damage weapon, just do the Magic Infusion pass, or Cold even. It's just going to do overall more damage. Even on a very souped up staff, you still get like 200 magic damage, which is just not enough to justify a temporary buff on a weapon that you can't switch out or you lose it. It's just not worth it. Same thing goes with the shield as well. You can get infinite stability on a shield without any magic. You can just use talismans for that, so you don't even need this stuff. It's very, very situationally useful. Shard Spiral is one that I am becoming very fond of. I've only used it for maybe 20 or 30 hours, but it is quickly becoming one of my favorite spells. I'm going to say it's an A tier spell. And you might think, well, it's kind of shit. It's a very slow projectile, very easy to dodge. The thing is, though, it forces people to not engage with you. And that's the important part. If they roll into it, it sort of stops and locks in place and spins into the ground and can chain hit people over and over again. So they're forced to kind of side strafe for a minute, which leads you to be able to use some Glenstone Arcs or set up some magic glint blades or whatever. The fact that it's so slow and it can be chain cast, it's a very weird timing to have a very slow thing tracking you, because now you have to worry about fast projectiles that are coming out. So you have a Shard Spiral chasing you, and as it's about to get there, you do an Adula's Moonblade or something like that. So they dodge that, and as they come out of that dodge, then they get clipped by the Shard Spiral a bunch. It's really one of those good combo spells, and it gives you a lot of openings. You can also charge it to do I have to hit like 900 damage on a Shard Spiral before. So it actually does a lot of damage as well. And it can be spam casted. It's very good for setting up combos. It's one of the most useful spells I've actually found, and I wasn't even using it for most of my time playing. So Shard Spiral is actually extremely good. You do have to do Sellen's entire questline for it, though, but it's definitely worth it. Shatter Earth is sort of in the whole thing as Rock Blaster. It's just not very good. You do like that drill. It's very telegraphed, and the drill lets you know the explosion's coming. So once someone's seen that spell one time, you're never going to hit them with it again. Not really good. Shattering Crystal. Shattering Crystal, I'm going to put on a very high B tier. Shattering Crystal is essentially a crystal shotgun. If they're basically not right up in your face, because then the ones from the sides will miss. It's basically like Bestial Sling. You know, Bestial Sling has that sweet spot where if they're too close, it doesn't really hit them for that much. If they're too far, it doesn't hit for that much. But if they're right in that medium range, then multiple splinters hit them. It's sort of like that. And if you get that multiple splinters, this spell can do a ton of damage. It can do like 1,200 damage, which is nuts. And it comes out pretty fast as well. So for that reason, the surprise shotgun effect of it is actually quite good. So it's probably the best crystal spell in the game. I will say this is the best crystal spell. Yeah, overall. Starlight, lol, just use the torch. Stars of Ruin. Where is Stars of Ruin? I forgot the image. Stars of Ruin. Honorary Stars of Ruin in S tier, obviously. Stars of Ruin is one of the few spells that are almost completely undodgeable without Bloodhound Step. I don't know where the hell it is. Yeah, that's weird. I can't really add things to it now. That's fine. Imagine Stars of Ruin here. So yeah, Stars of Ruin. It's chargeable for an insane amount of damage. You can even use Lusat's Crown to boost the damage even more. It just does too much damage for how hard it is to dodge. I think, honestly, the spell needs to be nerfed. Because, you can do more DPS with other spells, but it's such a brainless, no-skill thing. You just hold the button and do 1,000 damage to someone. I don't like that. I'm not a huge fan of it. I've toned down my Stars of Rune use quite a bit, and I pretty much only use it on people that are also using Stars of Rune. And because then I drop an Eternal Darkness and just laugh as I kill them with their own spell. It's funny. But for the most part, I can't recommend people use Stars of Rune because of how unfair I think it is. But this is a tier list, and undoubtedly it is going to be an S tier. It is one of the best spells, if not the best spell in the game, because of how safe the damage is. Pretty much only countered by Bloodhound Step, which counters everything in the game, so what's even the point of discussing it? So Stars of Rune, obvious S tier. Then wait a minute. Oh, that's Star Shower. This is Star Shower, I see. Star Shower is just worse Stars of Rune. So I guess I'll go C tier, because why would you use Star Shower when you have Stars of Rune? It's just a much better version. Swift Glinstone Shard is absolutely S tier. This is also one of the best spells in the game. It comes out lightning fast. You can spam the spell. You can do it from rolling, from jumping, from running. It can combo into other spells. It's an enabler for things like Comet. It can combo into Moonblade. It can combo into Shard Spiral. It's like your setup spell, and it's your chip damage thing. It can roll catch people after you've hit them with a Carrion Piercer. It comes out at exactly the right point that they'll be coming out of their roll. It is just so a universally useful spell to just do 300 chip damage, 300 chip damage. It adds up so fast. On a properly optimized mage build, Swift Glenstone Shard is one of the best spells in the game. The damage adds up insanely fast for how fast it is to cast. It's incredibly cheap. Every build should use Swift Glenstone Shard to pick off people who get to a safe distance, think they can heal before you can launch a spell, and then you just hit them with a pebble and they go down. I can't even tell you the amount of times I've hit people with a Swift Glenstone Shard right as they get out of range. They think they're safe. I see their hand come up, and then they're dead. So I have roll caught people with that spell hundreds and hundreds of times, and I can't recommend it enough. It is extremely strong. Terra Magica is interesting. You would think Terra Magica would be more of one of those PvE spells. I think Terra Magica is an A-tier PvP spell. And the reason is, if you put Terra Magica down on the ground, it forces something from your opponent. So they have two options. They can run and pressure you so you don't start spamming a super giga-powered Stars of Rune or something like that. But also, that empowers your Carrion Slicer. So if they come in close range, you're doing 800 damage at Carrion Slicer, and they're going to get shredded. So it puts them into a very precarious position where any option they choose is not very good. If they go at a distance, you'll just bombard them with, Stars of Rune or ridiculously strong spells like that. And if they come in close range, then you've got Carrion Slicer, Duelist Moonblade, Piercer, all this stuff. So it's like, do they pressure you out of it, or do they stay safe? Or it puts them in a very, very not safe position. So I originally thought this was mostly going to be like a PvE type spell, but actually in PvP it's extremely good because it creates that dynamic where you put them on a timer and they need to make a decision very fast. If they don't make a decision, then they're just going to go down. So Terra Magica actually very, very strong in PvP. Next is Tops' Barrier. I mean, it's just the spell block. I'd rather just roll, honestly. It's not useless for like Stars of Rune and things like that. I'd rather just roll, though. Really, not offensive spell parries are never going to be that great. So I'm going to put that in a solid D. Tibia Summons is awful. It summons these skeletons. That's very, very slow. I don't even want to talk about the spell. I think Unseen Blade has potential meme usage. But once you swing once, they're going to know what you have. I think for meme usage alone, it's okay. Unseen Form actually is quite good because if you're getting ganked and you're getting, like, for example, sniped by people with Frenzy Burst or someone's trying to target you with Stars of Rune, it does lower your lock-on range quite a bit. So they actually can't lock on you from very far away at all. So if you're going against multiple mages and you don't have Eternal Darkness, it's a kind of a funny alternative to where they can't target you from far away. So they're forced to just sort of free aim spells, which at a distance is almost impossible. So it's actually surprisingly useful. Finally, Zamor Ice Storm is horrible. There's no reason to ever use this. The windup is extremely long. It does very low damage per tick. You can simply roll out of it once you see it happening. The only way this does 500, 600, 700 damage is if you just sit there in the entire storm for no reason. Takes way too long to cast. There's no reason to really ever use the spell. But that's it. That's pretty much every sorcery rated in the game. I will be moving on to incantations. Eventually, I still need to try a couple more things before I get enough knowledge to safely do that. But that is it. Curious if you guys agree, disagree, but that is my tier list for every sorcery in Elden Ring for PvP. Hope you enjoyed.